Ruslan.
We don't have time, like the loose cannon guest speaker, like we don't have time to entertain people who aren't about kingdom business, and aren't about teaching people about God and the Bible, and explaining that well, because like life hangs on the balance, right? Like souls are in the balance, people's
Yeah.
futures, people's careers and how they do, and people's the families and generations kind of hang in the balance. And I know that's not to say somebody who preaches. There is a verse that says, those who teach will be judged more strictly.
Yeah.
But there is this kind of like this flippancy that people go about it with, and this like there's just like a lack of seriousness. Not that it needs to be like only business all the time,
Yeah.
but there, I think people kind of forget. People are like, well, we just go to church on Sundays, and
Yeah.
well, no, there. What if somebody's going to church? I remember, people. My professor in college said, I preach as if my 18-year-old son is on the back row, and this is his last chance. This is his last chance that he's giving me and God. And this is it. I'm preaching that person. At the same time I'm preaching, he would say, I want to preach to the 8-year-old on the second row. I want her to understand what I'm saying. There's that might be too specific for some people, but there are people who kind of speak, or they get up and they just go, hey, this is like the me show. This is hey, God's been good and God's been faithful, and I've healed this. Well, I've been praying for the sick and they healed, and I resurrected. What about the people in the audience who have not seen victories like you're talking about? What about the people whose finances they've been working on for years, and they're not at the place where you are? What about the people who haven't seen a victory, and we're just proclaiming and singing all these things? But I think church needs to be kind of inclusive for people who are all in those different spaces, whether you grew up in church like I did or not, as opposed to, hey, come on in, one size fits all, you're welcome. Are you sick? Come up front. Well, not without sounding morbid, but it's like, hey, let's live and sing and pray and worship and learn together, with the understanding that there is more that we don't understand. There are books and things that people that we can continually glean from, but this isn't it. This isn't it. Whatever this conversation, this isn't it. The Wednesday night isn't it, but we need to treat it, the Sunday morning, we need to treat it as if, treat those people in that context as important, and as if like, hey, like this is helping form your theology. Like the songs that we sing, that's helping you form your theology, your understanding of God, the messages that are preached. So I remember, you're gonna open up with jokes and be all flippant about it. Like you're doing a disservice to people who are like, hey, I need help. Right. I'm at the end of my road here, and I think that's what the church kind of needs to be for a lot of those people, and it hasn't been that. And some churches are, though. Some churches are.
Yeah. I love that, because I think it's like a twofold thing that the church could be, because we're kind of dreaming here, right? The church can be both, meaning that for the person that hasn't had anything or is coming from poverty like I was, the church can be that bridge on literally pulling people out and giving people resource and access and pathways that, like, had I not been in a church, I wouldn't have been exposed to financial literacy. I wouldn't have been exposed to entrepreneurship. I wouldn't have been exposed to a lot of the stuff that I was exposed to. That was and I wouldn't have been able to try so many things. I got to try video broadcasting because I was at a church. I got to try so much of what I'm doing now because I was in a local church. So it's like the church literally created a pathway for me that if I wasn't in a church, I probably wouldn't have had access to thousands of dollars of cameras to record sermons on and understand YouTube, and right. But I think the flip side of that is, for the person that is suffering, this Jesus helps make sense of the suffering, right? That it's not a crutch, but it gives you some perspective, and it helps you. That faith helps you make sense of this. So it's like from one standpoint, it's pulling people up because of, I would say, this diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds. Like I wouldn't have been around people who were making multi-six figures, but I was in life groups with them. Right now I'm in life groups with people that do 7 figures, and it's because of the church, right? But then when things are good, when things are amazing, it becomes that very real, let me give you a utility for making sense of your suffering, because Jesus said, like, in this world you will have suffering. And I think it could be and both, right? It should be. And I don't know, I guess, like, I see such a practical utility to Christianity. People call me like I'm too pragmatic sometimes, right? But I see there's a utility to faith. There's a practical side of faith that I think is so important to the average person walking around, whether it's being pulled up or whether it's, hey, this is how you make sense and make sense of the suffering. And I don't know, to your point, I don't know if we take the business as seriously. I don't think if we're as urgent outside of, like, the eternal, because that's also on the line. Like, the eternal side is on the line. There's real things that hang in the balance, and I wish we had more urgency instead of, like, oh man, you make fun of Christians, you're a bad guy, or like critical race theory, oh, it's ruining America. Like, it's just like so many things that we are sidetracked. Meanwhile, there's people really hurting that really need answers.
Yeah, and the fact that we're talking about this right now, and people have been listening to you and all your videos, and there are so many other people kind of speaking out about this, as you know, as much as people make fun of like deconstruction or whatnot. I think it is kind of it is igniting like a lot of healing among a lot of people, because now all of a sudden, you know, I'm my pastor now, Pastor Michael Bain here at Greenville Community Church. Like, he's one of those guys, like, whether we're in a parking lot or he sees me here at the church kind of coming or going, we'll talk, and he'll ask me like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Hey, did you read this article about this pastor or about this thing, or what are your thoughts on that? And he'll share those with me, and there's this realness that I've told him to his face, and I've told other people, and I'm like, I've longed for that from a pastor, from like a leader, and I haven't had that for a long time, because there was just kind of like this is essentially like an NPC, you know, just kind of like a, hey, handshake, God bless you, see you next Sunday type thing. And I'm like, hey, like, what, help not only just help me, like, well, where are you at? Where are you at in terms of, where were you at when you were fathering a 2-year-old, like where I'm at now, you know, like, what did you do? And the realness of that, of hey, like, it was, I trust Jesus and God was good, but it was hard, you know. That in and of itself, I mean, has helped me. Multitudes are like, hey, I'm my first year of marriage, hey, this is confusing, and I'm lost, oh, what am I doing? I'm like, hey, it's gonna be like that, you know. But you know, stuff, we're able to, people aren't afraid to confess of you know, their shortcomings, or their fears, or their worries in certain matters. And I think that's part of being human. That's part of faith. That's part of being like, hey, like, I've been in diner booths with grown men who've also lost somebody, and I'm telling them about, you know, losing my dad. Now we're 2 grown men crying over hash browns. You know what I mean? And I'm like, hey, this is okay, and this is helpful. And I look back on those moments where I'm like, was this ever a thing? Like, I hope that more people can experience this. I hope that more people don't come across good men of faith, and they're just kind of like, hey, man, go with God, you know, and you just go and break down somewhere else. But we need to, you know, bear each other's burdens. You know, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And the content just kind of hopefully sheds light on, hey, let's laugh together. But hey, this is the problem. And reels, the Instagram reels I've made this year have racked up over 10 million views. So I'm like, hey, maybe there is a problem, mainly because more people are enjoying it than I would have ever thought in my entire life. I can't conjure up 10 million people out of thin air.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, maybe you're onto something. Let me. I got one last question, and we'll see if you guys got questions in the chat. Just write questions in all capital and then drop your questions, and we'll try to get to a few of them. Do you think my last question is, do you think the stuff that you're doing with the humor, do you think that some of the funny stuff that's kind of dysfunctional, that's kind of wonky, it's kind of weird, do you think that is a byproduct of this, like, Western Protestant, you know, European Christianity that's very narrow? A lot of times if we pull back and we say, okay, let's look at, like, historical Christianity, like across all the schisms, across like the Catholic Church, the Armenian, Ethiopian Orthodox, the regular Orthodox, the Indian Orthodox. Like there's such a broad Christianity that all agrees on like the creeds and these like essential things that we hold near and dear. And they might have some differences or different views of church tradition or the influence of, whatever, the church discipline, right? But do you think so much of what we're dealing with here is because we have such a narrow view of what it is to be a Christian? And then you like narrow it down. So you go from like, all right, like you have this schism, and then you got Protestants, protesting the Catholic Church. And then it's like protest after protest after protest, then the Pentecostals protest, and then the Assemblies of God then protest the Pentecostals, or whichever order that was in, right? And so you got all these like protests, and now we're so fragmented and we're all over the place, but there's no central unifying like system, where in other pockets of Christianity that there is. And it looks a little less goofy sometimes. And then here, and I would say the backgrounds we're coming from, it's really like a bunch of independent churches kind of just doing their thing. Yeah.
Man, what was the question? Repeat the question again. You're too intellectual, my man.
If we had a more global view of Christianity, and churches had a more global view, so we didn't view like we're the right church because we're the savior of the world, right? But it's like, no, we're just one branch that God is using, and God's using believers in Ghana, and God's using the underground church in China, and they're not all Protestant, by the way. Like, and then there's the Ethiopian church, and then there's the Armenian church, and then there's even some Catholics. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's even some Catholics, and God's using all of these different people, and maybe that'll keep us a bit more humble and maybe not act as goofy with some of the church culture that we just make normal.
I mean, you kind of asked the question and then you answered it. I have stopped. I live in South Carolina. A lot of people out here love to talk about race, and a lot of people love to talk about whatever policy should look like. Mm-hmm. And then I quickly realized, I'd get into conversations with people, not hostile, not screaming matches. Somebody would just say something, and then I remember my dad one time said, he was like, what? We were somewhere, and my dad heard somebody say something. We all heard it, and on the drive home, he was like, hey, you know why they talk like that? And I was like, no, and he just goes, because they haven't traveled. And I'm like, oh yeah. So anytime somebody talks about Christianity in the Western Church or whatever, my first question, and it's not like a gotcha, but it's kind of like, hey, have you ever been on a mission trip? Have you ever been out of the country? Mm-hmm. And if that person has said no, I just I put this conversation into like a different column. Now I don't write off that person, but there is just so much more to Christianity and to worship, and to loving the Lord and preaching and teaching than whatever you kind of grew up in. And I know this because I was born in Tanzania, moved to the States when I was 2. From 2 to 11, I attended a Pentecostal church in the South, and I went to Pentecostal churches and a couple of other denominational churches in the United States. And then I went to Tanzania, and all of a sudden, the worship is different. The preaching is different. The questions people ask are different. The Eastern kind of mindset of interpreting scripture. And then I learned to speak Swahili, the language in Tanzania. And all of a sudden, I'm reading the Bible in Swahili. And the interpretations are different. And I'm conversing and I'm talking. And I still have conversations with my mom, or somebody like, hey, what does that verse say in Swahili? Okay, but yes. So there are people who kind of go, this is how it should be. And this is how it should always be. And this is what but that's kind of like, hey, are you leaving? We'll take, for example, there's the church growth curriculums and booklets. It's like, hey, reach 3 people, and then they reach 3 people, and it kind of looks like a pyramid scheme. But then they're like, hey, pick up somebody in your car to go to church with, when you're driving to church on Sunday. Take them a fruit basket. Hey, guess what other cultures, people in South America or Africa, People've got fruit. It's sense. Nobody has a car. A majority of people don't have a car. So you can't just pick up. So there are whole chapters of these books about, hold the door open, Christian dating, take a girl out on it. Well, other cultures aren't going on dates. They're not going to the movies. You know what I mean? So there is this understanding of like Christian, like church, that has been exported out to different countries. And once you've been to a different country and you kind of hold the two, side by side, you kind of go, oh, wait a second. I don't think that works here because people don't hang out at coffee shops. Or I don't think that works here because small groups look very different, because people's houses look very different.
Hello.
So
it's so good, bro. One of the most refreshing things that I did is my first language is Russian, and just going and hearing the gospel in another language. Yeah. Just kind of like the brain is just something different.
It's amazing, man. It really is. And then watching the people respond to that. And I've heard so many different stories. I grew up a missionary kid, so I know so many missionaries. And just the stories that they've said, like in particular, I heard a lady was telling me in Papua New Guinea, she's down there, she's helping translate the books of the Bible, the Bible to people in Papua New Guinea. It's indigenous. They speak different languages, so they're having missionaries down there learning the language and translating it and working with people in translating it. And they would pass out, a page or a chapter or whatever level was available to the people. And I remember they were passing them out, as the story goes, they were passing them out as they were translating them. And finally one day they passed out, like, I think it was like Matthew chapter 1, where it goes through the genealogies. And all of a sudden, like the interpreter who was with them, when he read it, was like, wow. And then he took it to the people of the village, and the people were like, what? And then come to find out, they all gather back to where, the little headquarters where they had set up to translate the Bible. And they were like, wow, this is how we know that people are real, by their generations and the way this was outlined. Now we understand that what these pages that you've been giving us, these are real stories of real people that really happen. We didn't think about it like that, but so even that in and of itself, where I've heard pastors, how many times have you heard a pastor here kind of talk about that and like make a joke about it? Oh, I'm going to skip over the names, they're too hard to say. Whereas other people look at that and they're like, this is real. My middle name in Tanzania, my middle name legally is Kundale, which is my dad's first name. My dad's middle name is Moses. All of his siblings' middle names, they're also Moses. So it follows that, that Joshua, son of Nun, like in the Bible, I'm Shama Kundale, Elishama Kundale Mrema, meaning that I'm the son of. That in American culture kind of doesn't make sense, because it's like, my parents just picked out a middle name for me. It's Allen or whatever. But when you go to different cultures and you see how widespread other things are, you're like, wow, it really does parallel the Bible, and it's just beautiful, man. It really is. I don't want to sound like I'm at my wit's end, but it's traveling, reading the Bible, being a Christian, whether you can travel or not. I think I'm not trying to discredit people who have not traveled. Even talking to somebody from a different culture, that's one of my favorite things. Yeah. Talking to somebody from a different culture, like I can't talk to you enough, but it really does just kind of open up your eyes to how massive and global this Christianity thing is, man. This Jesus thing really is, and to make fun of what has become common here, to make fun of it, this is a fraction of the whole, but the whole thing is complete. God's in charge of it. It's going, it's a bus. And that bus is going to continue on, and that's not to borrow a rise and fall of Mars Hill analogy. That bus, God's in control of that bus. You know what I mean?
That's good.
Kingstream Entertainment, Ruslan.
When the culture says do what you love, we respond with love what you do. You may have responsibilities that you aren't passionate about, but loving what you do means being faithful to what's in front of you. Committing to excellence as if that were your greatest dream. Colossians 3:23 says, work diligently at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Love what you do. Love love what you do.
King's Dream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Yo, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you found it valuable, considering giving it a like and subscribing. This month, I'm releasing the Love What You Do collection, and to celebrate, I'm doing a 3-day virtual event to help us go from learning to love what we do to ultimately doing what we love. By the way, it's free, so hit the link in the description to grab your seat today.